Hello all, A Knife's Tale here, bringing you another knife review. Today we're going to be looking at the Real Steel Metamorph. I think it's the Mark II. This knife is in milled aluminum, which is actually quite nicely executed with a full backspacer here. Though you can see some, I want to call that epoxy? Yeah, it's glue. They glued that stuff in and don't love that. Don't love that one bit. Also don't love those giant freaking mushrooms growing underneath that pocket clip. Yeah. This knife, as you can see, is a inset liner lock in 14C28N. It was designed, yeah, there's the G5 Metamorph, I think it's the Mark II, designed by Stop Hell. And it's got this very thin Warncliffe blade. Come on now. You were dropping just a second ago. It's got a little bit of a stick. It wants to stay in position. Not stick as in stick with lock or stick here. It seems to want to hold into this position until you give it a little bit of movement. Let's jump into specs on this knife real fast. As of recording this right now, I'm still somewhat undecided about this knife. So at the end of the video, I'm going to try to give you my thoughts on it, and let's see where I end up. You've got just over 3.5 inches of blade to the front of that scale, just pretty much dead on, we'll call it. 4 5/8 in handle, and the overall length is 8 1/8. Let's do some quick comparisons. Civivi Elementum, small. And Civivi Conspirator for the large, or full size. I always want to say large, but no, it's full size. We haven't seen any large knives on this channel just yet. As you can see, this thing is actually a bit longer than the Conspirator. It seems to be mostly handled, maybe a little bit in the blade. Yeah, it's a little bit of both. It's a tiny bit on both sides. But this is a very slim knife. It is not tall in any way, shape, or form, and the blade almost folds up completely into the handle, which is pretty darn close to completely. So in the pocket, this thing is very, very minimal. But those frickin' pocket clip screws are a big issue. They are round enough that you can still get it in and out of the pocket. It's not hard or anything like that. It's just they can cause more problem than they should. There is no need for that. Also, you have to notice that the scale is, I hope you can see it, let's see, sort of contoured in here. It's bowled out a little. So it doesn't really affect anything too much, but it does sort of put this at a lower point, so I don't know. It can make it get a little bit funky in and out of the pocket. Honestly, the biggest problem are those screw heads, particularly the first one. Yeah. Okay. Now that we've got the comparisons out of the way, let's move on with specifications to the weight. 2.5 ounces. This is an extremely light knife. You're getting more than an ounce an inch. You're getting an inch more than an ounce an inch. So yeah, ratios, if any of that stuff is important to you, this thing will do it. But of course the blade is quite thin and small in pretty much every way. So you're going to have to deal with that. Because this is definitely not a blade that I would bend on, even more so than most blades that I wouldn't bend on. speaking of thin and small, that probably was a bad segue, but the handle is 453 thousandths, so it's pretty thin, I think. Let's bring back that Civivi Elementum for a second and say, yes, I think it's about the same as the Elementum. Oh, pop right out of there. The blade stock, 115 thousandths. Pretty thin blade stock. Now this freaking tiny, 112 thousandths-ish? Or 12 thousandths, sorry, not 112 thousandths. I hope I haven't been saying 100. It's 12 thousandths behind the edge. It's quite thin behind the edge with a thin blade stock, and despite the fact that it doesn't have a lot of room to drop, yeah, this thing slices surprisingly well. Because of this geometry, it performs decently. It's got this swedge up here. The jimping extends kind of as far as you really would need it to. That's about as far as I want to go on this knife. And the jimping is actually pretty good. It provides actual traction. Even though it is what I don't like about jimping, slightly crowned and radiused, it is so slight that it doesn't make it a problem. In my opinion, when you start crowning jimping, especially on front flippers, what you end up with is, because of that arc, the crowning, when you touch the front flipper, you come in contact with that peak at the center line first. And if you have to push in hard enough, say it has a strong enough detent, that can start feeling sharp really quickly. So I don't typically like crowned front flippers. This one is subtle enough and has good enough jimping that it's not a problem, but that is something to watch out for in general with knives, in my opinion. The crown front flipper, while it looks good, I mean, you can see it, that the widest part of the jimp is up at the center while it sort of flares down on the edges. And that's because it has to go deeper in the center and remove more steel than it does on the edges, so it ends up being wider. And that tends to result in a slightly sharp experience, particularly if the detent is heavy. This is not heavy. This is super lightly crowned. Not a problem whatsoever. It's actually pretty darn comfortable. It's a pretty great front flipper, if you don't mind front flippers, because this is front flipper only. And that is important to note. That's it. Hardware, T8, T8. Son of a gun, that's T6. So not only are they giant mushroom screws, they're T6 mushroom screws, and it's not reversible, though that's not that big of a deal for this knife. It's a liner lock that really kind of, I don't know. Yeah, you could use it left-handed. Yeah, I mean, it's easy enough to actuate left-handed, but it is not reversible with the clip. And those screws are horrible, and they're T6, so they're extra horrible. Kind of wish that wasn't the case. I just want to say that while this knife is bendy because of how thin this blade is, there is no play. Left down, up or right, nada. It does have that desire to... Okay, it just called me a liar there and decided to drop on its own there. It's almost drop shut, honestly. It's pretty good. A little bit of oil in there, which I haven't put into this knife, would probably get it to drop shut. And that's impressive considering how light and thin a blade this is. It is also... doesn't look centered, but... yeah, it is. I think it's just these little screws underneath poking out that are throwing it off. It actually is pretty darn centered. That's one thing I don't like about the camera. The camera can throw those small details off pretty good, just as it can seeing on length and stuff from distance because of the angle that my camera sits, or any camera sits for that matter. This knife is on bearings, if you hadn't figured that out. The plunge grind on this knife is way back here, so there's a ton of life to sharpen on for this knife. The edge ends up here, and you just have them. I mean, yeah, you can take that all the way down. That can go all the way up. You will never sharpen through all of that knife. Not a chance in heck. You're getting your materials worth out of this thing. Stop pin does hit behind the edge, unfortunately, but again, it hits it back here, so you still have all of this room that's not edge to work with. It's not going to be a problem at all in this knife. It will never be an issue. Ergos. Super neutral. Pretty darn good. It's thin. It's sort of deft in the hand feeling. I will say that this clip has a pretty high bill. It is a continuous rise, which is nice, but pretty high. Yes, you can feel it. It's not uncomfortable, but yeah, I do feel that the tip of that clip. Particularly in the saber grind. A little bit less so if I move forward into the push grip. I feel it, but not as much. But it's not uncomfortable in any position. Again, though, the clip is kind of one of the big problems on this knife in that those screws make it a pain in the butt. The clip works in other regards, but those screws need to be flat. Otherwise, you'd have a great clip here. Maybe take a tiny bit off that rise. I mentioned the hidden lanyard pin, but I don't like seeing that finishing epoxy sticking out, to be honest with you. You'll never have to mess with it, and I suppose you could if you wanted to dig it out of there, but well, this is a budget knife, and it very much feels like a budget knife. There's a little bit of hold, not lock stick, but just sort of a desire to sort of creak a little when you're disengaging it. It's because the lock bar is so thin, and well, it is a budget knife. Oh, the lock bar is steel, by the way. Really, there's not too much going on here. And there's not really too much to speak of, honestly. It cuts well. It's got good stainless steel. It's aluminum, which is actually quite nice and finished well. It's light. Yeah. I should say that this knife is normally, I believe it was around 60 bucks, which makes it a budget knife. And it feels, yeah, I could say that's a pretty good budget knife. I'll say it's a recommendable knife. Just understand that in tight pants or trying to get it all the way in there, you might have a little fuss with those stupid screws. Other than that, there's nothing really bad on this knife. Maybe the fit and finish can be executed a little bit better, but you're at budget territory, so. And honestly, the fit and finish on the aluminum is, the rest of the aluminum is quite good. So, yes, I do say this is recommendable at 60 bucks. But I will also note that this knife seems to be, at time of recording, pretty consistently on sale. I got mine for $35. 14C28N, aluminum. This execution for $25, particularly considering this is a, I guess, a collab outsourced design knife that tends to add a little tiny bit to the price tag. 35 bucks is, yeah, this is a good budget knife for 35 bucks if you don't mind a pencil-thin knife. I mean, it's a very light, almost executive-style carry knife, though it's got a little bit more personality than that normally. There is a black version that might work as a decent gentlemanly carry, but it performs surprisingly well for having such a dramatic design. And yeah, $35, this is pretty good. I definitely recommend checking this out. I'd like to see a little less branding. Honestly, the real steel is actually pretty minimal. There's just a little bit much on the branding for the other side. I don't need the name of the blade. Just put O Stop Hell real small, maybe down there. Cut the rest of that out. This is a pretty good one. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's budget liner lock with some little flares like the inset liner lock and the design for a really good price at $35 if you can get it there. But it wasn't bad priced at $60. And you can probably almost definitely find it there at that price for all over the place. I'm pretty sure most places sell these that have knives and vendors, and you can probably find one of these on Amazon, and I just said probably multiple times for no reason. The lock is a little bit thin, but yeah, this is a pretty fragile blade in general. I'm not going to be pushing this through any sort of real toughness. I'm not going to be testing that lock strength with this knife. It's just not in the design, so it doesn't really matter. And it holds up. I did actually do a light spine whack, and it didn't do anything. So, for the most part, they seem to hold up. I like it. I'll recommend it. Yeah. I'd like to see none of that. And I'd like to see none of that. Those screws. But honestly, for $35, this is a pretty great budget knife. I think that's the ultimate conclusion I'm drawing here. You get a lot of blade edge. You get a deft, nimble, interesting feeling knife. Because of that bowl out, the handles do feel kind of interesting. They have some interesting angles on them and everything. And none of it's bad, it's just different. So you have to be looking for something different. That's the only point of caution I would suggest. If you're not looking for something unusual, then yeah. And I also like this hunter green aluminum. Oh god, someone down in the comments is going to say this one looks like a pickle or something like that. I don't think it does, but I'm sure that's going to be said. Comes in multiple colors, reasonably priced, and well executed enough for a budget knife. That's all. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you want. See you later.